Hi, friends, and welcome to the School Librarian Learning Network podcast. I'm Steve Tatro, also known as Dr. T Loves Books, and I love talking about all things related to school libraries. I may be an old dog, but I'm always trying to learn new tricks. That's why in each episode of the SLLN podcast, I'll chat with a school librarian about a lesson, program, or activity they love. Hopefully, this can be a place for school librarians to get ideas and find new ways to engage with their students and staff. As a good friend likes to say, we're better together. So I hope this podcast will help school librarians connect with and learn from each other. The opinions and ideas shared in this podcast by myself and my guests are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. And because school librarians always strive to be good digital citizens, I cite sources when using material that is not my own. Without further ado, let's get to this week's episode. Hey friends, we are back once again, and I am so excited. We've got Dr. Andrea Trudeau with us, and this is going to be amazing. I cannot wait to hear from her, but I am jumping ahead of myself because we need to get our guest here. So, Andrea, why don't you take a second, tell people about who you are, where you're from.
Hi, everybody. So yes, my name is Andrea Trudeau. I'm a no-shush librarian who works in a middle school just north of Chicago. This is my 27th year working in that school. I've was a teaching assistant in the computer lab, a longtime classroom teacher, and this is now my 10th year in the library, and it is the best job ever.
I cannot agree more, man. 27 years, that is impressive. I tell you, I just hit my 25-year mark, and everybody's like, oh my God, that's amazing. 27, bury me, leave me in the dust. I love it. So you were 10 years in the library, which means that for 17 years before that, you weren't in the library. So how did you end up getting into the library?
It was never anything I anticipated. I was in the middle of my career and just sort of like itching for a change, but I wasn't quite sure what that was going to look like. And I'd been working with an incredible librarian who retired, this woman, Karen Davis. And as an 8th grade ELA teacher, I brought my students down for a book talk one afternoon, and she's book talking a bunch of books. And it was like the answer fell from the sky. And she had so in Illinois, we put in for retirement years in advance. So we do it 4 years in advance in our district.
Wow.
And so I know, right? So she had just put in, and I'm sitting there listening to her, and I'm like, this would be amazing. I want to do this. So I realized I had 4 years to go back, and in Illinois, I can go back and get an endorsement on my teaching certificate. So I took 27 master level hours and then decided to do it. And I basically walked right into this job because I had already taught in the school, had the connections and the relationships. And so it made the transition pretty seamless.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome, man. That's a great path too, to see it and to understand that this is the thing and have the time. Because my school librarian was like, I think I'm probably going to retire next year. And I was like, this program is at least 2.5 years. What am I going to do? So that's interesting that there's such a long lead time on that.
Yeah. It worked out really well. They give us little bumps in our retirement, in our pay before we retire. So it benefits the teachers that do that.
Oh, nice. Well, that's very nice. So we're going to be talking about VR and empathy, and you've put together some really great resources. But I'm kind of curious, how did you end up with this particular lesson activity?
Thank you for asking that. So when VR was just hitting the stage, I was at what's called the NICE conference. It's the Northern Illinois Computing Educators Conference. It used to be ICE was the state level. Now it's IdeaCon. And it was like a cold January day. I was in a high school on a Saturday, attended all these sessions. And at lunch, they were just handing out these raffle prizes. And my friend Maria Galanis got this Google Cardboard. And it was not put together yet. It was just flattened out. And we're looking at this what is this thing? What does this do? And of course, being the curious person that I am, we brought it back to school, and I started kind of playing around with it. And I'm like, ooh, what could I do with this? This is in my first year or two as a librarian. And I found this really incredible app, RYOT by Huffington Post, where they had you would put your phone, you'd have this app and put it on your phone and then put the phone inside the Google Cardboard. And I had a little station I created with 7th grade students where they were basically on the shores of Greece, Aleppo, Greece, and they're looking out into the water. And all of a sudden you see this boat coming towards you, and it's these Syrian refugees who have fled, war. And they come ashore and they're crying and they're excited, and you can, see the sky, look down and see the sand. You feel the emotion because you're immersed in this space. And so it led to some really rich conversations that year because we had been studying refugees. And prior to becoming a librarian, I was a seventh grade social studies teacher. And I work in a very privileged district. So kids see the world, but they're seeing the world in the four seasons. They're not really seeing the world and understanding how people live. So I felt like it was my job as an educator and a librarian to kind of like burst the bubble and help them recognize how people really are living around the world and how fortunate they are.
Yeah.
With the hopes that one day they would take the resources they have and do something to better the world. So, we have these really amazing conversations in class. It was a little station of like 5 or 10 Google Cardboards.
So I'm going to,
oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to just jump in for a second. There's two things actually. One is just for the folks who are not as, let's say, experienced as we are. The Google the Google Cardboard was basically like a little box. And when you kind of unfolded it, it sort of looked like an old ViewMaster, which is going to even be more dated than the Google Cardboard. So it unfolds into a little box. You put your phone in it, and it basically becomes a really inexpensive VR headset. So just in case there are folks who weren't sure of that, we've got some of the newbies out there who maybe weren't familiar. And I do have a question about this program that the students were looking at. And I don't know if you'll have an answer, but was this a produced piece of media, or was this like live footage that somebody had shot that they turned into this? Do you know?
Ooh, it was Huffington Post. So I think it was live shot / produced because they worked with Susan Sarandon, who I know did some of the narration for some of the, So it was during a time when, and I've put this in my resources to share with your listeners, Chris Melk, who's a very famous VR cinematographer, he did this TED Talk in 2015 and basically pronounced that VR was the ultimate empathy machine. And so that changed everything because now you have all these nonprofits are trying to raise awareness, and they're like, how can we help people really experience what's happening so that we can raise funds for our charity? And so I think refugees in particular has been a massive focus when you look at VR for Good programs and charitable organizations, because they want to support these people and their hardship. And so it's such a different experience than just reading an article or even just seeing a video on the news, because you are immersed in this space and you are there experiencing it with the people.
Yeah. And like you were saying, you can look around and literally see the 360-degree space around you. So your students are not only seeing these people coming toward them like almost like a documentary film, but they're actually, like you said, they can look down and see the sand. They can look up and see the sky. Like it is an immersive environment. So that's got to be really amazing as an experience to see that basically firsthand. Like this is, I hadn't really thought of it before, but this is a really interesting first-hand accounting that we can get from VR because you're literally immersed in that space.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, we as librarians really take pride in creating collections with the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I see VR as being a very powerful sliding glass door because now you can bring in this experiential learning experience with this technology, whether it is more simplistic phone in a Google Cardboard or something like a Meta Quest. And it allows students to be, you become so present in the space, you lose the sight of the fact that like you're sitting in a library or classroom, because now you put this on and you are transported to another place in time, which is so profoundly powerful.
Yeah. Wow. So you started with some Google Cardboards. You've got some students that are engaging with this. How did it grow from there?
So I think I knew I was onto something interesting because this was a 7th grade. And so then in 8th grade, they were doing U.S. history, and the U.S. history teachers came to me one day, and just it was happenstance that a family in the area, they had their temple was sponsoring different Syrian refugee families, and they wanted to create what they called like a welcome wagon. So they were going to create this private Facebook page, and there was a family in particular that they had spent 2 years in a Turkish refugee camp. They were moving to the United States. They didn't know any English. They knew nothing really about American life. Wow. And so the goal was to like help them assimilate to life in the United States.
Hmm.
So we were tasked with having students create short little videos to help them understand life in the United States.
What
Now,
a
I have
great
to just,
project
I
that
know,
is.
right? It's so cool. But here it is, it's eighth grade. I have kids that are like rock star, super involved kids. They've got Hebrew lessons, violin, soccer, like they're so super involved. And the only time we could really do this was after school. So I said to the teachers, all right, we're going to set a date. Let's see who shows up. I'm thinking like, we'll get like 5 or 6 kids and we'll make it
Right.
work. It was standing room only. We had like 50 kids show up.
Wow.
And they ended up making these amazing videos about like how to use a vending machine, how to use a microwave, who are the Disney princesses, because there was a little girl in the family and they needed to know that. And it made me realize that I really feel that the VR experience helped them. It like left an imprint on them. It was this
Yeah.
powerful experience, and they felt an emotional connection, and they felt compelled to do something. And that in turn ended up inspiring my research for my PhD and all the work that I've been doing since in my library.
That is just so amazing. Wow. And boy, just to think about that level of participation from students for something that is purely voluntary. Like, I don't think
Mm-hmm.
we get 50 kids going out for a sports team. Like, never mind coming out to work on an extra project that's going to be more work, right? So,
Right.
wow, that just speaks to how powerful this is. Amazing. Hmm.
Yeah, and
So,
so I knew it was something magical because like I said earlier, it's just my goal was to help children understand that um, they can do something. And this was something that they could do right then and there as 13 and 14-year-old students. And just to see their joy and excitement and them trying, putting in so much effort to do such a great job, it meant a lot. So I
yeah.
think VR can really change the way people think.
So you've got this awesome formative experience that's helping you think about how VR might come in. And as you said, this became an area of research for you. You've published several papers on this, which are very impressive and kind of lend more depth to the idea that this is a tool that we should be utilizing across academia, but especially, I think, in our lower grades where we really can see that impact on the students and help them see that there's more to the world than just their little slice of it. So that's really amazing. So, how did this particular lesson come to fruition as you were kind of pulling all these different threads together that we ended up with stories of displacement?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to work with the same social studies teacher who kind of trusted me to do this little Google Cardboard lesson. He's actually since retired, but he ended up working with me, and we decided to basically take this little nugget of an idea and expand it. So our stations were something that we moved from the classroom into the library, which I loved. And I have a large space, so we were able to just set up all these different tables where students could go and explore different picture books.
Hmm.
And then downstairs, I had a set of about 10. Originally, it was Oculus Go headsets. Now I have MetaQuest.
Hmm.
And in 10 to 15 is about a manageable amount for one teacher to oversee.
Yeah.
And so then I have students do kind of the VR experience. And then we've used, We Are Displaced, which is a really beautiful collective biography book that has all different experiences. So it was just a way for them to kind of sample different stories and find connections between the stories and also see the strength in the people in these stories and really honor what people are going through. And we're finding in our school that we're getting more and more forcibly displaced children that are coming
Hmm.
to our school, especially from Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah.
And so it's important for people to be aware and have that understanding and that empathy. And so that was kind of the focus of the piece. So it's just a way to keep the literature there and the story, but also have the VR incorporated.
So I'm curious, how did you end up getting your headsets? Was that funded through the district? Did you get a grant? How did that come about?
Yeah, I was able to get, so here in Illinois, we have something called Rails, which is a statewide organization that kind of is sort of an umbrella over both public and school libraries. And they have these really wonderful grants called My Library Is. And I was able to win a grant to get 15 headsets. Of course, the summer that happened, the price of the headsets went up. So my district had to kick in a couple $100 to cover me.
Ugh.
But yeah, we were able to get 15 headsets, which has been great because I've used it not just with the refugee stations, but we do Anne Frank's house, we do Traveling While Black. And at the heart of all of these experiences is about empathy and understanding. Like that is what I want my students to take away from this experience. And that has been the focus of my research as well.
I love that you are finding a way to use technology as an empathy driver, because it seems like so much of the technology that we use these days almost functions in the opposite way, that it kind of separates us, that it puts us in our own little world, in our own little filter bubble of information or connections. And you're seeing a way to reverse that completely and help people be present in other situations that they probably wouldn't otherwise get the chance to. That's really awesome. That's really awesome.
And I should mention, so in my study, I used a film called The Displaced, which you can actually find on YouTube. And I have a student who had previously used VR, so there wasn't like the novelty of it, who also was on the autism spectrum. And that year he was having a really tough year. But you put the headset on, and now in The Displaced, you're face to face with this boy, Oleg from Ukraine. And right away, he's reaching out and he's like, hey, friend, hey, little guy. He was like trying to talk to him. And his data was just remarkable. Both his cognitive and affective empathy scores. So cognitive empathy is when we can put ourselves in someone else's shoes.
Okay.
Affective empathy with an A is when we can feel what someone else is feeling. His scores doubled. So that to me was remarkable, because I think sometimes we wonder if students that are neurodiverse are able to relate to others, and are we getting through to them? And it was profound what this experience had on that particular student. But all of my students that I used in my study, they had a growth both in cognitive and affective empathy. And even when you have a film in 360, so for The Displaced, I had in my treatment group, people were watching it on the headset, but my control group, they just watched it on their Chromebooks. And so you still have the 360 capability, but you still know you're in the library and, you're not feeling like you're there. However, their affective empathy increased enough that it was statistically significant. So to me, I want your listeners to know, if you can't get the headsets, even having the ability to go onto YouTube and get 360 is going to impact the way they feel for others. And that's supported by the research, because there is some research out there on empathy that affective empathy is kind of like the basement. It's the lower level. It's something that we learn early on because of mirror neurons. So when I see you're upset, I'm going to feel that as well. And so when these kids are seeing this distressing situation and hearing these really moving stories, they're going to feel for the person that's right in front of them. VR, though, was the one that really increased in the cognitive empathy. And that makes sense also, because now you're enveloped in this space. You kind of feel like you're there with these people, and you feel like you're in their shoes. So
yeah, I can see how that would let you start filling in the blanks that you might have in your own personal experience and see like, oh, okay, now I understand. Not only do I feel it, but I understand why these people are facing what they're facing.
Yeah. So if you can't get the VR, there's still real power in 360. And so I know with the ability for people to do, things on iPads or Chromebooks, and there's a lot of really great 360 films that are available on YouTube. I also like, anytime I offer a VR experience, to have a 360 as a backup, because about 8 to 10% of students will experience motion sickness. They will get dizzy, they'll get headaches, they'll get stomach aches. Some will know that coming in and they'll tell you. Others, it'll happen when they're in there. So I always tell them, if you're feeling any discomfort, tell me, we're done. We're going 360, because I still want them to have the experience, but I don't want them feeling sick. So
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I have a VR headset. I've got a MetaQuest that I have played around with a bit, and there's most of it fine, but there's certain things that will absolutely just make me feel nauseous. And it's like, okay, this is not the thing for me. So that's definitely an important thing to bear in mind when you're experiencing this, especially if it's for the first time, that your body may react differently than you're expecting.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it's the fast moving stuff. And so with the cinematic VR that we do, most of the time it is pretty calm, and so most kids do well, but there's always a handful that have that issue, and so I want to make sure we provide accessibility.
Yeah, that's great. And it's really interesting to hear that a student who was on the spectrum had a really great experience with this, because I think a lot of times in schools, we kind of think, oh, what are we going to do to help those students, have experiences that are going to be impactful and meaningful? And we're not all necessarily trained in the intricacies of what that might involve. So to know that there's a tool that can be very helpful for this for some students is really, that's a great thing to have in the back pocket.
Absolutely. And the way the filmmakers are creating these films, I think they're getting more creative. So Traveling While Black that's a longer one. It's about 20 minutes long, and it is set in Ben's Chili Bowl in DC, which is a famous diner. And you basically sit with different individuals and they tell you what it was like to be Black in the time of, the Green Book, using the Green Book. And so there's a scene, I know it's fascinating. And it actually comes to modern day where they show the brutal killing of Tamir Rice. And, I work in a predominantly white school. And so I think it's important for them to understand the Black experience. And again, it has promoted these incredible reflections and rich conversations, and it's so impactful. But what I love about that film is the filmmakers, at one point, they have you seated in a booth and you look to your left and there's someone next to you, and you look across and there's people. It's like you're sitting in the booth with these people while they tell the story, and you're like part of it. It's brilliant.
Wow. That's cool. I'm definitely gonna have to dig into that.
And all of these I'm mentioning are free. So that's the other thing that's amazing. And Traveling While Black is also available on YouTube. So if students can't handle the VR, we can give it to them in an alternative format.
And just in case people aren't paying attention, you did provide a Padlet of some resources that includes videos as well as books, as well as some research to go with. Here's why this is a good thing that we should be thinking about looking at. So
yeah. So I included the Chris Milk video, which I think is really important to watch if you're just trying to get started. And then shamelessly, I included my research, but it's honestly some of the only stuff out there for middle grade. A lot of the research on VR is more focused on the STEM and STEAM and not as much on cinematic VR. The studies that I looked at before I started my research, most of them were for media literacy students or media students in college, or they looked at adult responses. So it's some of the first in its kind to look at, K-12 students and how they respond.
That's awesome. That's amazing. So I kind of sidetracked us a little bit. So I'm gonna try and bring us back around a little bit. So the students are coming in. There's stations set up. Some of the stations are physical texts. Some of them are VR stations. So once they have sort of made their way through the stations, or is there something in particular that leads them through the stations, or is it sort of a rotate every so often?
Yeah, it's just a rotation. So there's all different, we did, and I need to look at my notes here. We have a bunch of different picture books. So there's one called Stepping Stones, where the art is made all out of rocks, and it's profoundly beautiful. I have Stormy Seas, which is kind of this mixed media piece. You can take some excerpts from graphic novels like The Unwanted by Don Brown. And then obviously the VR. So yeah, over the course of 2 days, we have them kind of cycle through to get tastes of different refugee experiences in different countries. And and I've put in the Padlet as well, there's different VR experiences you can provide. So I've put the Displaced in there. There's one called the Key, which is really more of an animation, and I didn't know this until I saw it. I guess a lot of people, when they have to leave their homes, they take their key with them, knowing that they'll probably never return. And that key is the symbol of their home, of their homeland and their home. And that's all that I know, it's so powerful.
Yeah.
So I get the chills So that one is interesting because you're kind of on the journey. It's very emotional and it's very symbolic, but it promotes such interesting conversation. And all of these resources, I should mention, I'm seeing this as kind of a 6-12 lesson. Some of the picture books certainly could be used with elementary, but most of the VR films on this topic are really going to be meant for middle school or high school students.
I mean, I
So
think we don't do enough with picture books in the upper grades. And I love that you are specifically making that an element of this, because it's something that, yeah, okay, sure. Kids, younger kids can understand them, but older kids can analyze them, and they can see things that they would not have seen as younger students. So I love that you're bringing those in.
Thank you. Yeah, that is something I did as a classroom teacher too. And I just feel like in today's world where we are gaining so much information visually, like we as librarians should be promoting visual literacy. And
Mm-hmm.
so much of the story is not just the text, it's in these beautiful visuals, the color palette, the placement of objects, so, it leads to some really great conversation. And ultimately, the students read the We Are Displaced, and they pick one individual from that collective biography, and then they showcase their story through some kind of artwork of some kind. So some students got really inspired, and they loved stepping stones, and they're like, can I do some work using stones? I'm like, sure. And then other kids wanted to use Canva, and some want to use CoSpaces and create a VR world. So then it's up to them to kind of share their learning and highlight sort of the triumphs of these stories and the struggle and what these people have been through and the grit through their own chosen media form. And then they can share it with their classmates.
I love that. I love that they're getting to not only reflect, but that there's a sharing component, that they're creating something that is to them meaningful, but that is making meaning from these other experiences. And then that gets shared with the whole group so that we're all learning from each other as we go. That's awesome. I can see why your social studies teacher would want to do this. This is amazing. Boy.
Thank you.
So, how did you sort of pick like what elements you were going to use as resources for this? What were there any particular ways that you decided, like, these are the VR films, these are the books that we're going to use? Or was it more just as you came across stuff, you were like, oh yeah, that's definitely going to be something to throw in?
It started as an ooh yeah, and Stormy Seas was a book that was nominated for a Rebecca Cottle Award here in Illinois, so that's a state book award. So I wanted to highlight that at that time. I also wanted to be mindful of different kinds of art and format when we were picking the books. But with the VR, it's really dependent on the teacher and what they'd like. I used to use something called A Place Called Home, and that no longer exists. So then I've had to kind of pivot. So that's the other thing, is the VR is constantly changing. And so when something is great in a home run last year, it never fails. And it's like, oh, it's been sunset and now that doesn't exist anymore. So then you have to go find something else. But there's a wealth of information. I also wanted to be mindful of the VR not being too lengthy, because, traveling while back 20 minutes, by the time you get everybody hooked up and in and good to go, it takes a long time. You can only get 2 rounds of kids in there. So limiting it to like a 6 or 10-minute film was important to me as well, because then I could cycle several rounds of kids through in an hour-long period. So it's, kind of timing, mixed media, teacher input. And then every year you mix it up, because it's fun to just try different things and see how the kids respond.
Absolutely. I can also see a strong case being made for keeping the film short because of our students' attention spans and helping them stay on task. So that totally all makes sense. So you have done this lesson before. Is there anything that as you have done this, you've been like, oh, next time around, we got to do this, or we need to add this, or man, we shouldn't have done it that way, we should have done it this way instead? Like any learning moments as you went?
I think the biggest learning moment has been just to be more mindful of where these refugee stories are coming from. So it's not just, when I first started, it was like very heavily Syrian. And now we're finding that there's forcibly displaced people from many different countries. And so making a conscious effort to provide these really powerful sliding glass doors and offer students an opportunity to see them from all these different places. And because there's sadly a lot of commonalities between the experience. And so helping them sort of understand that. I also have had to be sensitive to my students who are forcibly displaced, who are now in my building. And sadly for them, that's a mirror. And it's like, I want to be sensitive to that as well. And that's a big shift in recent years. So I think just being much more mindful and sensitive to this topic.
I gotcha. I'm I'm curious, and I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer to this. I'm just generally curious. Like, so you've got students who may be displaced. Do you try to seek out pieces that will fit with their particular experience, or do you avoid that, or do you not go either way? Is it more just we're looking at the general experience as opposed to a specific experience?
So, I mean, kind of going back to that mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, I so far have just leaned into it because I want kids to be able to see themselves in the work. And then it it has provoked such amazing conversations where there's such increased sensitivity and awareness. And I want the students who are forcibly displaced to realize that we are here to support you, we care about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I want them to feel that. And I think having their classmates, for example, see Oleg from the Ukraine, and now we have a student here from Ukraine, how important that is to see, and it's obviously they're two totally different experiences, but there's some commonality. And so for the students who aren't from Ukraine to hear this story and kind of know what someone's been through, it's like they might start to think a little differently, and maybe they're more likely to ask that person to come and sit with them at lunch and be a little kinder. And I think it's really powerful.
Yeah. Oh man, that's so great. So I can imagine that this is a lesson that works on so many different ability levels without needing a whole lot of adjustment, because you're watching video, and the picture books, while they can absolutely be really dug into, they also are a very accessible resource. So I imagine this works really well with students with IEPs, students at different ability levels. Is there anything that you felt like you needed to adjust or try and manipulate to make it more accessible for any of your students?
So we've been having such an influx of multilingual learners. And so we've been, especially with print books, what we've been doing is offering an iPad with Google Translate so they can just kind of scan over. And then now it's translated to their native language, because we have many students that come in that know no English or know very little English. And so now I'm throwing them into this lesson. And yes, there's pictures, but there's this beautiful story that's written. So having the Google Translate, I think, really helps them. But the fact that they're getting up and moving, that there's a lot of visual components, I find that the students are really engaged. I joke on those days, I could be a cardboard cutout. They just they are just doing their thing and they are good to go. And then even when they're creating their projects at the end, it's something they are excited about. They get choice. We offer options, but then they can also propose something totally on their own as well. And I welcome creativity. So each step along the way, I feel like we're trying to individualize and make it engaging for them.
What a great mark of a lesson, though, that the students are basically don't need you to be there because they are so focused on what's going on. That says it all to me. Clearly this is landing. So speaking of landing, have you gotten any particular feedback from students or from the staff about how this has gone when students have had the chance to experience this?
Yeah, so anytime I do a VR experience, I have the students do a reflection, kind of selfishly, because I'm just curious, what do you think of all this? And both students and staff have just said that it's a really powerful experience to be able to read all these books and to view the VR. They'll say things like it really has brought it to life more. I feel like I really understand it, because it can be a really complex topic.
Oh yeah.
And to watch it in the news or watch just a quick video clip isn't the same as hearing someone's personal story. And that's the beauty of all of these pieces. So many of them are someone's personal story. And that provides that level of connection that you don't necessarily get from a textbook or, something on a student news channel that we turn on for them. And I try to find, material that has a child character in it. So, because students have said when it's someone around their age, they feel even more connected than if it were an adult. So I think being mindful of the age you're working with and trying to find individuals of that same age in your media is really important too.
That makes a ton of sense. And again, coming back to primary sources, as good as a news source might be, when you're getting firsthand information from a primary source who has been through this, you're going to experience it differently. You're going to understand it differently. So that's really such an important reminder. I also love how you very specifically make a point of having them reflect. And I think that's so easy to overlook when we're doing lessons with students, especially if they're coming from a class and they're, participating in something here, but then they're going back to class. That's something that I know I need to work on building into my lessons more often, because you're right. Like, you want to know, is this landing? Is it working? Do I need to change stuff? And I think it's really easy to get in the habit of, I'm going to present this 92 times because all the classes are going to come through and hopefully it's working, but I'm not really sure. So, man, so many things I'm walking away from.
It makes you feel good. And, and it doesn't have to be hard. Like, I'll sometimes just do a half sheet and it's just like 2 questions, or like QR code, scan it, go Google form, like 2 or 3 questions. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always have an open-ended one. Is there anything else you want to tell me? Because it never fails that a kid will have this aha moment and just like blow my mind. So yeah, I mean, and I think it's good for us because we're working so hard behind the scenes, and it's great for advocacy too, because when a principal is wondering, how are things going? Well, look at this. Look what the kids are saying about all that I'm providing as this instructional leader. It can be such powerful data.
Wow, that's great. Man, all right. So I'm already designing QR posters to put around my library so that anytime we do something, just go right to it, students. You got to do this. Oh, so is there anything that if somebody was going to do this for the first time that they should sort of have at the front of their mind as they're getting ready to dive into this?
Well, I think the picture book part is easy. The book part is easy. I think we can do that. When it comes to the VR component, my advice is to just start small. When I started, I think I had like 5 headsets. Full transparency, MetaQuest is not really designed as an educational tool. There's no like platform like Class VR where you can like push everything out. So you have to work with your tech department to figure out a login system. I have to then individually push out everything to all the headsets, and doing it with 15 can be cumbersome. It takes like a week or 2 in advance for me to make sure it's all ready to go. And it never fails that a couple don't work. So I would say anyone starting out, just a couple. And, maybe you start really small. Maybe you're not digging in to do these stations first thing. You find somebody who's willing to give up some time and just have a couple kids come and try it out and see how it goes. Because then if it goes well, maybe you can get the funding from your district to get more. But it definitely can be overwhelming at first, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. And then as you see the kids responding the way that they do, it becomes so worth it to put in all that time, because it's going to be such an impactful lesson.
Yeah. Oh boy, this is so awesome. I mean, there's so many things now, like not even necessarily about this lesson, but just having this conversation has got me thinking about all these things that can go on in the library. I love it. Man, this is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing it. We are now going to take our 90-degree turn and go into our book break.
Book break. Swinity.
So
Yay.
You can share whatever you want to share, just some titles you think people might want to know about. So what did you want to bring to the table and let people know, hey, you want to put this on your radar?
Okay, everyone, librarians, educators, administrators, you absolutely have to read That Librarian by Amanda Jones.
Heck yeah.
I was actually just talking to a woman who lives in the community where I teach, and she was talking about how she just adores librarians and she's so sad by what they're going through. And I recommended this book to her. It is a powerful story. It's a part memoir, part manifesto. It shares Amanda's journey defending LGBTQ plus books in her public library in the summer of 2022. And basically all the threats, death threats, smearing, everything that she has endured. She is a champion in our field and continues to battle this is not even battling for books. This is battling for humans. That's how I see this, because And so she is my hero and one of my dear friends. And I have both the print book, which I've read, and I have her audiobook, which she has read, which I love when authors read their own books. Yeah. And I recommend them both. They are phenomenal.
Yeah, yes. I did the same thing. I ended up listening to it because when you've got the author reading to you and she's a good reader because she's a school librarian who reads to students. So it's going to work out.
Yes.
It was great. Yeah, I am totally, I could not agree more. What a great book. And like you said, not just for school librarians, like this is something that so many people should be reading to see. It boggles my mind how few people still really understand some of these battles that are going on that are really about dehumanizing other humans. So it's really, it's sad, it's scary, but you're right. Amanda is such a champion and she continues forward and is just doing her thing. She is such an inspiration. Man, yes, absolutely great title. And I think you had another one you want to share?
I do. So, as someone who is nearly 48, and my hormones are, I kind of laugh. I work in a middle school where I'm handing out books about periods all day long to the sixth graders. And now I am entering the next phase of my hormones where I'm entering the closure of all of that in menopause. So, there is a fantastic book called New Menopause by Dr. Mary Claire Haver. And this is a very understudied topic. And so she is a really incredible OBGYN who basically lays it all out there, like all the things that we can be doing. And it's great because it's small things like taking creatine to improve our cognitive function and to help muscle gains, wearing a weighted vest to help our bone density. So there's a lot of little things we can do. And then if you're really suffering, working with a doctor to look at hormone replacement therapy. And she debunks some of the previous studies that kind of scared women off from doing hormone replacement therapy. So I just felt very seen and heard and empowered. So as I work with my doctor on navigating this next phase of life, I like being educated. And since librarians are a very female-dominated field, thank you, Steve, for being a token male guy. It's important, I think, that we as women are empowered and knowledgeable about what's going to happen to our bodies.
Absolutely. It boggles my mind regularly how little medical research there is specifically for and about women and women's issues. And there's this great book called Invisible Women, and I'm not going to remember who the author is, but it is very specifically about how so much of our world was designed based on college-educated white younger males. And so that's part of the reason cars are the sizes and the way they are. That's part of the reason why roads are the way they are. That's part of the reason why transportation is the way it is, like public transportation. And the author goes through if they actually looked at how women use these systems, they would see that they use them a lot more than men do. And therefore these are the adjustments that should be made. And it's how has no one that women have not risen up and just taken us all out is I applaud your restraint. Let's say that.
Well, yeah, I think I heard a podcast recently that said it wasn't until the 80s that they had to require women be part of drug studies. They would just do a drug study on men and be like, oh, we'll just tweak it and make it less for women. I'm like,
yeah.
We have a completely different body chemistry. Are you crazy?
Well,
so yeah, it is baffling.
Put it in a pink container and it's for women, right? We're good.
Right.
Oh,
so, yeah.
Well, this absolutely sounds like an important title and one that I'm going to be interested in checking out too, because I'm curious. I mean, it's good to know what's going on with people. So,
well, I mean, we have to it's not something to be afraid of. And, I know you're married and you have a wife and every woman is going to go through this if they live long enough. So it's important for men to be allies as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing your time and your resources and your lessons and your ideas and your book recommendations. I mean, so much stuff you have shared here. I am so grateful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's been such a delight to spend time with you. And any of your listeners are welcome to reach out to me if they have any questions.
Awesome. And your contact info is in the show notes. So if folks want to track you down, they know where to go find you. So hopefully they'll take advantage of that because you are such an amazing school librarian and resource. So thanks one more time. I can't say it enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the SLLN podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for the episode. They feature links to the resources shared by our guest, as well as ways to keep in touch with them and links to the book break recommendations. And stop by the SLLN website, home to a curated list of free upcoming virtual events and resources for school librarians. It's easy to become a member of the School Librarian Learning Network. Just visit the site and use what you like. If you have a comment, an idea, a question, or something you want to share, you can email schoolliblearning@gmail.com. That's schoolliblearning@gmail.com. Know a school librarian with something others could learn from? Let us know. Until next time, be good, be safe, and be well.